Hey, it's Holly Brink with eXp Realty in Iowa, and today I'm talking to Dan Chandler from Rice Insurance. So, Dan, you want to tell us a little about yourself, your role in the company, and then we can dive right into what E&O insurance is and why Iowa agents need it.
Yeah, so I handle claims at Rice, which has a contract with the Iowa Real Estate Commission to provide errors and omission insurance to everyone who has an Iowa real estate license. Rice has done this starting in Kentucky for about 30 years and in Iowa now for, I believe, about 20 years. We do 14 states altogether, have about 100,000 realtors we insure across the U.S. We only do we do insurance only for real estate professionals, mainly realtors, a few appraisers, property managers, and mortgage brokers as well. So out of our 100,000 insureds, real estate professional insureds, we see about 1,000 claim files every year. And they run the gamut from an angry email to a lawsuit over, hundreds of thousands of dollars claim damages to a real estate commission complaint to maybe no one's making an allegation against you, but you're getting a subpoena. All those potentially can have coverage or impact coverage under our insurance. We can talk about those later. So I am one of 9 claims adjusters here at Rice. Again, we all just do real estate. I've been doing this for 6 years at Rice. I spent the 12 years before that as a title attorney here in Kentucky. It's a little something different every day.
That it is. Welcome to real estate. So yeah, I'm interested to dive into all that different stuff because I didn't know you could even use it for like real estate commission stuff.
Yeah, so usually when we say insurance applies to a claim has a very specific definition in the policy. A claim means you have received something in writing that alleges you made a mistake as a realtor and it seeks some sort of compensation from you. So it could be in the form of a lawsuit. It could be a mediation or arbitration demand. It could be an angry email that makes no sense. A claim doesn't mean you did something wrong. A claim just means someone is alleging in writing that you messed up as a realtor and they want some sort of compensation, some sort of payment or some type of services in response. That's a claim. The main coverage is for claims. The state of Iowa requires a minimum of $100,000 per claim coverage. And most of our files are claims or potential claims. A real estate commission complaint or a board of realtors ethics complaint, those aren't claims because they're alleging you did something wrong, but they're not seeking compensation. They want the real estate commission to fine you or make you take a class or revoke your license. But the real estate commission does not have the authority to make you compensate the complainant for their leaky roof, their leaky basement, or whatever they're unhappy about. So even though they're not claims, there is supplemental coverage under the policy for quote unquote regulatory complaints. Usually that's going to be the real estate commission. And what we can do is we can't pay any fines, we can't undo the complaint, but we can hire an attorney. We can pay that attorney up to $2,500 attorney's fees to help you respond to the complaint, try and get that complaint dismissed. 9 times out of 10, the $2,500 is more than enough to fully respond to the complaint, and usually there, more than half the time there's a dismissal at the end. So if you get a real estate commission complaint, definitely send it into your E&O provider. Most E&O policies, certainly the Rice policy, says you have to send it in within 20 days of getting the complaint. Some people make a mistake, they get a complaint, they say, I didn't do anything wrong. They answer it saying, I didn't do anything wrong. I've done 20 years real estate, never had a complaint. And then they get a fine. Then they get some sort of bad outcome. And then they submit it to, that's too late. As soon as you get it, you need to send it to provider. Let us look. We don't cover all real estate compliance, but over 90% of them are going to be covered by our insurance. We can hire an attorney to help you get out of
Wow. Yeah, I didn't know that. So how does that affect like the renewal process or, you know, the cost to
it.
the agent?
Easy, it does not. So our agreement with the Iowa Real Estate Commission says we have to give insurance to anyone who has an Iowa real estate license. It doesn't matter if you just got licensed. It doesn't matter if you've never had a claim. It doesn't matter if you've had 50 claims. It doesn't matter if we paid $1 million in claims on you. As long as you have an active Iowa real estate license, we have to sell you a policy at the exact same price that everyone else is getting a policy. We don't have our 2021 rates out right now, but right now that's $148 for the basic policy, the minimum requirements that the state have. There are some additional endorsements you can add to that to have extra coverage. They're not required by the state, but they may come in handy in certain situations. There's a little more. Again, we can't deny you coverage. Those options are all available. We had one gentleman who had about 50 complaints against him. We sold him insurance. We kept selling insurance every year until the Real Estate Commission eventually revoked his license. But we're not going to increase your premiums, which gets to another very important point. A lot of people will get a complaint and say, I didn't do anything wrong. I don't need to submit this to my E&O. And they think it's going to increase their premiums, or they think nothing's going to come of it. And maybe nothing does. And then maybe 2 years later, you get a lawsuit. So every time I speak to a group of realtors, I always begin by saying, you don't have to do anything wrong to get sued. Mm-hmm. You don't have to do anything wrong for that lawsuit to go on for 2, 3, or 4 years. And you don't do anything wrong for that lawsuit to cost $20, $30, $40, $100,000 in attorney's fees.
Right.
About half of our lawsuits against realtors are eventually dismissed. The judge says no evidence the realtor did anything wrong, but they all have attorney's fees. So if you want those attorney's fees to be paid by the insurance company instead of paid out of pocket, you need to report it as soon as you get the claim, whether or not you think you did something wrong. So again, it can mean a lawsuit. Usually when people get a lawsuit, they send it into us, but it's also those emails, those letters saying, hey, you messed up as a realtor. I want you to pay me X $1,000. Doesn't mean you did anything wrong, but as soon as you get that claim in, as soon as you get that demand letter, email, the text, err on the side of caution, send it into us. We're not going to increase your premiums.
Okay, so how do you send that in? Like, how do you process a claim?
So if you go to our website, www.risceo.com, you can download, we have a notice of claim form. You can also call our office and we can email it to you. But we have a basic 2-page form. It's 3 pages, but there's only 2 pages to fill out, and it's really easy information. Property address, phone number, the date you first got served or first got the demand. Email that to our office at our claims email address. And if we get that in on a Monday before we close, we try and have an adjuster call you the next day, Tuesday. And that adjuster will talk to you about the next steps. Not all claims are the same. First, we have to make sure it is something that is covered by insurance. Most are, but not all of them are. We talk about that. But once we determine there is coverage, the adjuster will work with you to see the lawsuit about hiring a local attorney, for example, to try and get you out of the lawsuit.
Okay, you're like blowing my mind. I know everyone's going to be like, what? Okay, so can you talk more about the different endorsements or add-ons and like what each of those means and kind of how they work in real life, like if you needed it?
Yeah. So before we talk about that, I just want to know, you are, as a real estate licensee in Iowa, you are required to have errors and omissions insurance. whether it be Rice or whether it be another company. You're required to have E&O. The errors and omissions policy, in other industries, they call it malpractice insurance, the exact same thing. But it's insurance that says if you were negligent as a professional, doing these acts as a professional, in this case, a professional realtor, then we can help out most of the time. It is not designed to be the only type of insurance you will ever need. I talked to one broker in another state. He says obviously 28 different types of insurance policies. So let's say there is a slip and fall case in your real estate office parking lot. That's a lawsuit you might get into, but it's not you being a professional realtor and an error because you didn't salt the driveway or what have you, the parking lot. That's not you doing something that requires real estate license. That's not going to come under our insurance. It probably come under the general liability insurance for the landlord or the real estate firm. Similarly, you might be driving to a home showing and be in a car wreck. Just because it's work doesn't mean that's a professional service. It's not going to fall under your E&O. So you probably already have homeowners. You might have general liability insurance. Those policies say we're not going to cover your acts in professional negligence. And that's where the E&O, the Rice policy, steps in. So the basic policy says generally if someone alleges that you were negligent as a real estate licensee doing something you need a real estate license to do, then we generally can provide coverage. Now, there are requirements, there are exclusions, but that's the starting place for our coverage. And you can add on to that. So if you are an appraiser, the first endorsement is the appraisal endorsement, not required by the state, but if you have an appraisal license, our real estate license coverage is not going to cover you if someone says you did a bad appraisal. Well, the real estate covers you for bad BPOs, but not bad appraisal because you need an appraisal license for that. So for $200, if you're an appraiser, have an appraisal license, you can add an endorsement that brings those additional meter appraiser license activities, bring those into coverage if someone says you were negligent appraiser. And we have a few of those every year. So that's the first endorsement. The second is what's called the conformity endorsement. If you only do real estate transactions in Iowa, you will not need the conformity endorsement. Iowa requires you to have a real estate license. Some of the neighboring states have the same requirements. Some of Iowa's neighboring states do not have that requirement. So if you live close, are you also close to a state line?
Well, not me personally, but I know our Nebraska agents need it.
Okay, exactly. So Nebraska has the same requirements as Iowa. If you have a Nebraska license, you have to have an E&O policy. So Rice Insurance sells a Nebraska policy, but you don't need both policies. You don't need to pay $300. What you can do is buy the $148 Iowa policy and then get a $15 endorsement to the Iowa policy that says we will make sure that you meet the requirements in Nebraska, even though you don't have a Nebraska policy. So that has nothing to do with whether or not you're actually covered for a claim in Nebraska. That is us guaranteeing that you have met the requirements of the commission. Because there are two reasons why people get errors and omission insurance. One reason is if you get sued, you got to make sure you have insurance. But the other reason is just because the real estate commission says you have to have it. And then conformity endorsement says we will make sure that in Nebraska or I need a map of the United States, Colorado, South Dakota, if you're working in one of those states, Kansas, we offer coverage there as well. Now there are a lot of folks who maybe they have a Florida real estate license as well, or a different state that does not have an individual E&O coverage like Iowa does, like Nebraska does. That's a different question. You can't get conformity because there's no real estate commission in Florida that cares whether or not you have an individual policy, but you still might want insurance. So that's a different question.
Yeah, because I'm also licensed in Arizona, for example.
Okay, yeah. So Arizona does not an individual mandate. But if you live in Iowa and you have an Arizona license, your Iowa policy still can cover you for Arizona transactions. As long as you live in Iowa. If you move to Arizona, then your
Right.
Iowa policy becomes just an Iowa policy.
Okay. Well, that's good to know. Awesome. Okay, so
So
tell us
that's
more.
that's the conformity endorsement. Um, the basic policy is 100,000 per claim.
Okay.
That's the minimum the state has. So that 100,000, that means if we pay a settlement, or if it goes to trial and the jury orders you to pay $100,000, we will pay up to $100,000 for settlements and jury awards. So that's the compensation. Someone's seeking compensation, we're paying it up to $100,000 per claim. That's the minimum. Now, for every dollar Rice Insurance pays for settlements and jury awards, we pay about $2 in attorney's fees. So the attorney's fees do not dip in to the $100,000. If we have had cases where we've paid $200,000 in attorney's fees and then paid a $100,000 settlement, that all can come under a $100,000 policy. But we've also had cases where the alleged damages and the jury at the end of the day says you got to pay $200,000. You pay your own attorneys, but you also got to pay $200,000 or $300,000. And that's when you might want to look at higher limits, or at least before you have that claim, you might want to have higher limits. Are you likely to have a six-figure settlement claim? Not likely, but we see a few every year. They do happen. I settled one last week for $350,000. So if you want more than $100,000 basic coverage, you can increase that. You can increase it to either $250,000 total or $500,000 total that would be available for the settlement. Both those still in addition to the attorney's fees. For the higher limits of $250,000, this is the only time where it actually matters if you've had a claim in the past.
Okay.
And it only matters in the pricing. So, for example, if you want to get the $500,000 in per claim coverage, if you've never had a claim, it's an additional $127. If you've had claims in the last few years, it's an additional $152. So it's about a $30 difference, $20, $30.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense.
And then the final endorsement I want to talk about is called the Residential Personal Interest Coverage Endorsement. This is a source of great confusion. So the basic policy says generally, if you or your spouse owns the property, or if an LLC, trust, partnership, corporation that you or your spouse owns the property. If you have an ownership or financial interest in the property, directly or indirectly, there is no coverage, even if they allege that you were a bad listing agent, selling agent, or whatever the case may be. That's what the general policy says. Now, there are two exceptions to that rule. The first exception is automatic. Everyone has it. It's if you're selling your primary residence.
Okay.
If it's your primary residence and it's either a single family home or a duplex, if you're selling your primary residence, well, let me add to that, single family, duplex, or a single unit in a condominium. If you're selling your primary residence, it's your primary residence at the time you list and sell it. We will ignore the fact that you own it, and we will treat it just like any other property you go to list and sell. Primary residence only. I have had a few cases where someone rented the house out for a few years. They had lived it for 10 years, but then rented it out, then sold it. That's not your primary residence time you list and sell it. There is no coverage under the primary residence automatic exception to that rule. So you don't need endorsement for selling your primary residence. If you have rental property, if you have a vacation home, if your parents pass away, you inherit their house. If you go to sell that, it's not your primary residence. It's not going to be covered under that automatic exception to the rule. So that is when you need the residential personal interest coverage endorsement. It is $15 a year. And what that says is that if you meet certain requirements and you have the endorsement when the claim is first made against you, again, we'll ignore the fact that you own it. We'll treat it like any other property that you own, that you listed. Any other property that you listed from a coverage standpoint. Forget the fact that you own it. So there are quite a few requirements. You have to have owned it for at least 180 days. The buyers have to get a home inspection. You have to use a standard Board of Realtors forms. There are a few other requirements. Those are listed in the endorsement. If you have questions about that, you can call us and talk to us about that. But you have to have the endorsement. This is key. You have to have the endorsement when the claim is made against you. And it's very common for someone to sell a house in year 1 and they think everyone's happy. And then in year 3, they get a lawsuit out of the blue. Mm-hmm. So if you go to sell if you sell a rental house that you've owned for a couple of years, you want to get this endorsement. You want to get it again when you renew. Maybe you want to get it the next couple of years as well. It's $15 a year. It's a lot cheaper than an hour with an attorney. And most of these lawsuits are not resolved in 1 hour.
Yeah. I've had a question. You said something about getting the home inspection.
That is only for the residential personal interest coverage endorsement. Mm-hmm. So when you are just a listing agent, you're selling somebody else's house. The judge is probably going to say you had no duty to know what's behind the drywall. You have no duty to know what the condition of the roof was. You're entitled to rely on what the seller told you. And a lot of times that's enough to get us out of the lawsuit in maybe 6 months instead of 3 years. If you were the seller and the listing agent, well, the judge is going to say, no, you had a duty to know what's behind the drywall and what's in the roof and that kind of stuff. So once we're on those lawsuits, we're usually stuck for quite a while. Now, the reason we require home inspection, and again, this is just when you're selling a vacation home or a rental house. We require a home inspection is because often these claims, the claims that arise from these types of transactions, the buyer is alleging that some physical defect of the house was not disclosed to them. So we want to make sure that everything that a home inspector would see as a potential problem is disclosed to them in writing before they close. So it just helps us cut the risk down a little bit, make sure we can avoid these before they become claims. So if you have that endorsement, you still have to, before closing, make sure the buyer had a home inspection and that you can document that they received it. So I say email it to the selling agent and keep that email because if there's a lawsuit a couple of years later, we're going to ask you to prove that there was a home inspection and the buyer received it. Because half the time, whatever they complain about, it was in the home inspection.
Got it. Okay. So right now it's a hot market. So I actually know of some agents that have had the buyers buy, say an agent buys a home and it's a fix and flip. So it's not their primary residence. And then they go to sell it, but it's a hot market right now. So they're getting multiple offers. So when a buyer's like, well, I'm going to waive it and I'm going to buy it as is. What I'm hearing you say is the agents should still get a home inspection.
Well, there's 2 questions there. So the buyer absolutely can waive the home inspection. That's going to make the buyer happy. It's not going to bring you into coverage for your E&O. Okay. So if you want the E&O coverage to be there, if you need it, then they have to have a home inspection. So what I tell folks selling their rental house or the flip house is just raise the price $500 and say sell it, provide a home warranty and home inspection. And if they don't get it, call up a good inspector in town and have come out and send them a home inspection report. What you should not do is send them a copy of the old home inspection report because invariably that will lead to allegation that, you learned something new when you were flipping the house and you did not disclose that. So a couple of things about that. There is, like I said, there is a requirement that you own it for at least 180 days. So if you buy it, just put paint, carpet in, and then put it back on the market, you're probably not going to own it for 180 days. And even if you have an endorsement, there's not going to be coverage. We can insure home flippers who have owned the house for 180 days. And that means a full rehab, tear it down stud, new systems, new roof, that's fine. However, if you are the builder of the house, or if you're spouse was the builder of the house, meaning you broke ground, you poured the foundation, or at least you were the general. That's a different issue. We can insure around your ownership, but we cannot insure around your construction and development of the property most times. So if you're the builder of the property, there's not going to be coverage. And if you owned it for less than 180 days, there's not going to be coverage under the rights policy.
Got it. And so I guess this is another place to point out, because nobody really argues this point, but we do not allow, like, if you are the agent and you're selling your home, you cannot represent the buyer. But we do have cases where they'll have an unrepresented buyer. What are your thoughts on that?
In a lot of states, it is illegal for the seller to represent the buyer. I will say it is extremely bad practice, and if there is anything wrong with the house, you're not only the seller, you're not only the contractor, you're not only the listing agent, but you're also the buyer's agent. And if there is anything wrong with the house, there is no one else to whom they are going to look. All fingers will be pointed at you. And again, I don't know the exact stance of the Iowa Real Estate Commission on this, but they probably, if anything went wrong, they probably take a very hard stance on that. Will we hire an attorney to defend in that case? Still possible, yeah, but you're gonna be in trouble. That lawsuit, there's no easy way out of that lawsuit. A lot of the times, the lawsuit will say, "Well, my realtor should have." Basically, should have surveyed the property. My realtor should have been an expert in zoning. My realtor should have been an expert in asbestos. Well, no. As long as the facts are clear of what happened, and you're not out there making representations about the survey or the zoning or the asbestos, then usually we can get you out of that lawsuit pretty fast, and you can get back to selling houses pretty fast. But if you're representing the buyer and anything did not happen by the book, then all eyes will point on you, and you're going to be in a lawsuit for a long, long time. Even if it's eventually dismissed, even if all the settlement is paid by the insurance company, even if you keep your license, you're going to be at a lot of depositions, a lot of court hearings, a lot of meetings with attorneys. It's going to be a lot of headache.
Okay, got it. So even having them be unrepresented and signing all that paperwork, at the end of the day, if they sue us, it's probably not going to hold up because we were the only licensed person involved in the transaction.
Well, the plaintiff gets to choose who they sue, and the plaintiff gets to choose what they allege. So, anyone can allege anything. Something does not have to be true to be alleged in a lawsuit. But if the buyer is unrepresented, that's up to the buyer. But if you are representing both sides, that is a recipe for disaster.
Got it. Yeah, we don't allow that. So perfect. Awesome.
I will say, just last week I saw a contract. The realtor was selling her own house. She was also representing the buyer. She was representing both sides, and she put in the contract that the buyer would hold harmless the seller for anything that was inaccurate on this 3-year-old home inspection. That's just sort of a grand slam of things going wrong there. And that case is not going to go away anytime soon.
Yeah. Wow. Guess that didn't work out very well. Okay. Wow. This has been so informative. I'm so excited that I had you come on. Okay. So I had another question before you keep going. I do have a couple agents that have, because of the climate of the market, they've gotten different types of jobs, so they've inactivated their license. So can you talk to me a little bit about coverage when you're inactive and what is recommended and time period and all that good stuff?
Yeah. So this is an area where it's very easy to stay out of trouble, but some people don't take some very basic steps and they get into trouble. So our policy, it's January 1 to January 1 of every year, and it's what's called a claims-made policy. So this year's policy applies to claims that are first made against you this year. Doesn't matter when the closing was. It could have been the deal fell apart at the table yesterday and now you're getting threatening emails and a lawsuit. Or it could be that something that closed 5 years ago, you forgot all about, thought everyone was happy, and you get sued. But it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what insurance you had at the time of the closing. It doesn't matter, um, uh, when the closing occurred. If you get the claim today, it's today's insurance that applies. However, it's very common for someone to file a lawsuit 2-3 years after transaction. Someone can live in the house a couple of years, then they learn there's a crack in the foundation. Then they go to put up a fence or a pool or a driveway or a deck, and the neighbors tell them, oh, the boundary's not where you thought it was. Then the people, go to refinance and they discover a lien on the property. After 3 years, I can't tell how many times after 3 years someone learns the property was on septic, even though the MLS said it was on sewer. So you might do a closing this year, you might have done a closing earlier in the year, and you don't get sued on it until next year or the year after that. Well, right. This year's insurance is not going to help you for a claim that first comes about next year. It needs to go in next year's insurance. If you keep your license and you renew your insurance next year, you probably don't have anything to worry about. But if you go inactive, if you put your license escrow, if you retire, if you move to another state that doesn't require E&O and you don't get a new policy, I've had cases where people lost their license, but for whatever reason, if you don't have insurance when that claim is first made against you, you don't have insurance. So you're paying all those attorney's fees out of pocket. So if you don't have a license, you can't get the insurance, but you can get what's called an ERP. If you put your license in escrow today, your current policy is still good until January 1, 2021.
Got it.
That's not going to cover you for that lawsuit January 2nd. You can add an endorsement to the policy that extends the time you have to report to us a new claim. ERP stands for Extended Reporting Period. And in other types of insurance, it's called a tail policy. So we can extend that. It's a little different every state. Now I believe it's up to 3 years.
Okay.
So if you put your license in escrow this year and you want coverage until 3 years, 4 months from now, that's an option. But you can't just put your license in escrow and forget it. You need to contact us and get the extended reporting period endorsement onto your current policy.
So everyone who's inactivated their license thus far this year, I should reach out to and tell them to reach out to you guys. Okay. Yeah. All right. So if somebody inactivated last year and didn't renew January 1, they just kind of missed the boat on that.
Yeah, so there is in the policy, I believe, a 90-day grace period. So if you forget January 2nd, January 3rd, and then you remember, it's not too late to call us. You can still get an ERP for 90 days after the policy lapses on January 1. As long as you haven't gotten a claim in that gap. If you get a claim on January 2nd and you call us January 3rd, we'll say, hey, we'll sell you the ERP, but it's not going to cover the lawsuit you served yesterday. So, for most people, it's not going to be a problem if they call us a week or two after, into January. But it's so easy to forget. If no one's calling you screaming, you're going to forget about it. So I advise as soon as you put your license in escrow, it's probably best to go ahead and call us. We do send an email blast out to everyone who has had insurance with us in the past but did not renew. But, sometimes that was a work email. Maybe you're not checking that email anymore. Maybe, if you're tired, you moved and you don't get any of our mailings. It's best to err on the side of caution. Let us know when you're putting your license in escrow and we can talk to you about the ERP. Okay,
great. Whew. Okay, what else do you have for us? Any stories?
So, anyone can file a lawsuit against you. Anyone can send you an email alleging you were negligent. And usually that's the buyer, but sometimes it's the seller. Sometimes it's a landlord for whom you're doing property management. Sometimes it's a tenant. Sometimes it's someone that you're not even sure who they are. As long as they are making the allegation in writing that you were negligent as a realtor, that you breached some duty as a real estate licensee, then typical insurance can apply. So common things that make people angry. Well, anything that causes someone to be unhappy at the end of a real estate transaction, or 3 years after a real estate transaction, they might look to the realtor for some sort of compensation. But leaky roofs, leaky basements, boundary disputes, undisclosed floodplains, flood insurance requirements. These are the bread and butter. But other common issues, zoning issues, permitting issues, a line not filled out on a contract, like an inspection deadline may pass before you thought it was going to. I had one last week where everyone thought the contract said seller to pay 3% of the purchase price, but actually said the seller's going to pay 3% of closing cost. So a $600,000 house, that was a big mistake. So, I think it seems like every modular house is confused with a mobile home for a stick-built home. These are, these result in a lot of unhappy buyers. I've seen properties on former landfills, on wetlands, asbestos, radon, multiple types of access issues. There's a rental property, there might be lost profits, lost wages for someone who can't move or can't sell a house in time, lost rent for the landlord. Dozens of times we've seen the house sold twice, two accepted offers. We've seen wrong lots, wrong houses sold many times. We have problems with the 1031 exchange, problem with title, problem with taxes, problem with school district. Yeah, it's not necessarily that it's your responsibility to check all these things, but the buyer may make the allegation and you might find yourself in a lawsuit. And we see some really bizarre claims every once in a while. We had a house with 2,000 snakes in it. Houses, any type of vermin we've seen. Grisly crimes have been committed and undisclosed. We had one was basically, I guess you call it a practical joker. He put an offer. He looked at the house, put an offer to buy the $2 million house, but then never showed up for closing. Just a troll. So that, after people had already moved all their artwork and their antiques out of the house, that was, had some buyer, unhappy sellers, that is, and said, hey, you should have verified this buyer a little better. Did you actually have a duty to do that? Probably not, but we've seen that. I had a gentleman, no written contract, then a handshake deal, that it would be $2,000 an acre for 100 acres. Well, when the people went down to the assessor's office, the assessor had it at 92 acres. So the people want 8 times 4,000. A lot of problems there. But these are the type of things that happen. So,
so tell me more about radon, because radon is a big issue in Iowa. And as of right now, there's no specific requirement that sellers have to mitigate. So talk to me more about that and what an agent's responsibility is. And then I'll tell you what I'm seeing in some of the markets that could get your opinion on.
So my understanding is radon is really just like any other defect with a property. You have no duty to inspect. You are not a licensed home inspector. You're not a licensed engineer. You are not a licensed radon lab. You don't have a way of knowing what tests the seller has had in the past. You have a duty to disclose what you actually know. And that's pretty much where your duty ends. So hopefully your sellers are honest. Hopefully they have a good memory. Sometimes, whether it's radon or anything else, sometimes facts get a little murky. It's certainly not unheard of for maybe the elderly husband took care of the house, he passes away, and now the wife is the one filling out the seller's disclosure, and she doesn't know if they had a radon inspection or mitigation or what the results were. from any type of test. And again, what does no mean? I had one case where the realtor got sued. He had never tested the house. He had no actual knowledge of any prior tests, but that house had been listed years earlier with another agent in his same real estate firm, and the real estate firm had on its shelf a folder that had inspection results in it. And the judge said, well, you had access to it. Now, is the judge in your case going to say that's the same rules apply to you? Maybe not, maybe. But as long, the more you disclose, the safer you're going to be. So, if a buyer has radon, is going to be a big problem. The buyer doesn't know what happened. It doesn't know if the realtor knew something and didn't disclose it. The buyer doesn't know if the seller shared what information they had with the realtor, the listing agent. They just sue everyone. And maybe, again, every case is different. I had a case where the seller had a report, said, hey, there's this problem with the house. The seller emailed it to the listing agent, and that email went to the listing agent's junk mail folder. And he didn't discover it until we were 2 years in the lawsuit. And after the seller saying, hey, I had this report saying radon, and I emailed it to you. So in that case, the seller was off the hook. So your duty is to disclose what you know. Most sellers are honest, but it's not unheard of for a seller to say, well, I told my realtor, you just test it kind of on the line. The realtor said, oh, you don't have to disclose that. It's not over the line. Well, we've had cases where that's been proven. That's what really happened. We've had cases were proven that's not what really happened. Mm-hmm. So as long as you can only control what you do. As long as you're disclosing what you know, as long as you're encouraging your sellers to be honest, that's the best you can do.
Okay, so two things about that. We've been on the phone a while, sorry. So I've had a couple of cases where, and especially in Iowa, it's not uncommon in small communities. So somebody will have a listing and they'll know about something, or something will happen during the listing period, and then it cancels and a different agent takes it on. Or even maybe they represented a buyer who had a home inspection, found a bunch of stuff, and they canceled because of it. So they walk away. So now you have like step two. It's got a new listing agent, maybe there's a new buyer. You may not be involved in this situation anymore, but you know that there's like catastrophic things in the house that are not being disclosed. Like what do you do? Anything?
First, I talk to your broker. And most states have an ethics hotline. The Real Estate Commission has an ethics hotline. There might be some Iowa-specific rule that I don't know. I will say I have seen a lawsuit before where a realtor who had nothing to do with a buyer's transaction got sued. The realtor who got sued, in addition to the listing agent, selling agent, the third realtor got sued had been in the house 3 years earlier. And the plaintiffs choose what the allegations are. Plaintiffs choose who they sue. And in at least one case, they chose to sue this other realtor. Now, that other realtor eventually got dismissed because it showed, actually we dug into it, that realtor went and talked to the broker, and the broker didn't do anything. I think, that's unusual. Most brokers are eager to see that everything's disclosed. But again, you can't control who they sue. As long as you are disclosing what you know when you are involved in that transaction, you are meeting your requirements. If you know something else is going down, then it probably doesn't hurt to talk to the parties involved and document it. The worst lawsuits, meaning the ones that go on the longest, are the ones where it's a he said, she said. Mm-hmm. If everyone agrees on the facts, the judge can usually sort it out pretty fast. A lawsuit gets finished in a year. The he said, she said, who gets to decide? The jury. And the jury's not going to get to it very quickly. In fact, because of COVID, there are no civil trials in Iowa for 2020. Criminal trials only, because they have a constitutional right to a speedy trial. So if you get sued this year, you might not see a jury until 2022. So best do what you can to disclose, document it so it's not a he said, she said,
Hmm.
and know that you did what you could do.
Okay. So our agents are not doing it, but then there's one market where everybody, at least for a while, was writing buyers can get rate on inspection for their own information. Sellers do not want to know the results and do not want to mitigate. And I saw it. I was like, no, you can't do that. But any thoughts from you?
Uh, so again, buyers can.
I like visualize a seller going la 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 la, like I don't want to hear it.
Um, if I represent a buyer, if I were the attorney for a buyer who found out that's what happened on the house they bought, I'm probably going to sue everyone. So it's not a good practice. I think, and you don't have to do anything wrong. And a lot of times the plaintiff's attorney will sue everyone they think might have insurance who might kick in. If the plaintiff's attorney can kick in, if each defendant can kick in $5,000, then if you sue 10 people, hey, you get $50,000. So the less you do to persuade a potential plaintiff's attorney you did something wrong, the safer you are staying out of that year-long, 2-year-long lawsuit.
Mm-hmm. Okay, awesome. Well, you've been very helpful. Very exciting. So it's August. If agents watch this video and they're like, oh, maybe I should have that endorsement, can they add it now or do they need to wait until they renew in January?
So it depends. You can add it now to the 2020 policy.
Okay.
So that would only be good until the end of December.
Right.
And that would potentially cover you for any claims that happen in the next couple months.
Right.
New claims. If you want to just have that endorsement kick in on January 1, then you can do that. You can add the endorsement when you enroll at the end of the year.
Okay. And then I thought I saw one of my agents has like a multiple year policy. Is that an option or common?
The ERP is a multiple year. It can be for 1, 2, or 3 years for the extended reporting if you're putting your license to escrow. But per the guidelines from the Real Estate Commission, you just have to have a 1-year policy, and that is the RICE policy. And that's what most of the policies are out there. Okay. Actually, I don't recall ever seeing a real estate E&O policy that's more than 1 year.
I may be confused. Okay, awesome. All right, anything else you wanted to add?
No, just disclose. You don't do anything, you don't do anything wrong to get sued. Call us if you have any questions. I probably spend a half an hour on the phone with agents, with brokers every day. Feel free to call Rice. We do this all day long. We try and sort out these disputes. So if you have a question about what's covered, for an upcoming transaction, if you have something that might be a claim, you don't know if you need to submit or not, feel free to call us. It's always better to get on the front end of these things before they turn into a big lawsuit. Again, we're not going to raise your rates. We're not going to drop you as insured. Err on the side of caution. Send it in if you think it's going to be a problem.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, I feel like my next task is to see how this jives with the policy EXP has, like what that process looks like. So awesome. So first contact your broker and then contact the E&O company. So well, thank you so much. If anyone has any questions, should they reach out to you directly or call like a 1-800 number?
My name's Dan. You can just call the office. I'm extension 302.
Okay.
So phone number, it is 502-897-1876, extension 302 for Dan.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Dan. I appreciate you coming on.
Thank you.